had to help me get on. And then I've put a little bit about sort of the application process and like how many times it took me to get on and stuff like that. If anyone does have any questions, just interrupt me, or yeah, put it in the chat and I'll try and answer them. But I've not done anything like this before, so I might not know all of the answers. Um, so I did my undergraduate at York University. So I didn't do a master's. I just went straight from undergrad to working to then on the doctorate. Although I do think it would be, obviously you're all doing masters, I think it is helpful to do a master's because I think most universities have a point scoring system when they're looking at your applications, and you get an extra point for having a master's and you get an extra point again for having a PhD. So I didn't have either of those. Um, During my undergrad, I did do clinical psychology modules, which I think helped. And in York University, I don't think anywhere else has this, but between York and Hull, they have a bit of a fast track route where you can get onto the doctorate straight from your undergrad. So I applied for that, but didn't get on. And in hindsight, quite glad that I didn't get on because I don't feel like I would have been ready in the slightest to do it anyway. Um, but yeah, that was my sort of undergrad experience. Just see there's something in the chat. Oh, okay, so not everyone's doing a master's. Okay. Well, yeah, you don't need one. You get an extra point, but there are definitely other things you can do to help you get on. So I left uni probably say in the summertime of the year that I finished. I think it was 2019. And then I just spent the whole summer applying for assistant psychologist roles. I applied for so many, I can't even remember, and just got rejected from loads. They're quite hard to get, especially your first one, because I think a lot of people are doing that thing where they want someone who's got experience, and it's quite frustrating because, yeah, how are you supposed to get that experience if no one will give you a chance? Luckily, someone did give me a chance. So in about October that year, I got my first assistant role. Again, I think I was quite fortunate in that I'm from North Wales, that's where my family lives. So I moved back there after uni, but I had flexibility to apply for jobs all over the country, really. So Manchester is where I got my first assistant role. So I just moved here. And my first role was a split post. So for 2.5 days, I was in an inpatient CAMS setting. So children and adolescent mental health services, inpatient. But rather than working directly with young people in the services, I was supporting a staff training program. So I think that's probably why I got offered it as my first role, because it was less sort of clinical experience and more staff support and training. Um, but it was really good because it helped me to get an understanding about inpatient CAMS and about the sorts of things that I guess how psychology can support those types of services. So I did that for 2.5 days a week. And then for the other 2.5, I was a research assistant in the adoption psychology service. So the post was advertised as a split role. So it was sort of all organized for me. And they were both in two different settings. Um, that was really good. I felt like I got some sort of clinical experience and I also got the research stuff as well. Um, this all kind of happened during COVID. So when COVID sort of hit, I did get seconded to the core camp service, which was in the same building as the adoption service. And there I got to pick up a couple of clinical cases, which helped with my clinical experience as well. And core cams is more just young people's mental health services up to age 18 who have, I guess, mild to moderate mental health difficulties. So I was supporting a young child who was having difficulties with depression and anxiety. Does anyone have any questions about those roles? I think they're quite niche. They're not the sorts of ones you typically see an assistant role for. So I don't know if I've described them very well. If people want to
I
ask
I
them.
have. I've
Yeah.
got, yeah, there are some questions. I think let's wait for them to come in. And can I just ask some questions while people are popping their questions in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
What was the interview like for those? Like, you know, because you came from undergraduate, how equipped were you from your undergraduate to manage that?
Yeah, so the interview was quite interesting. I didn't have much time to prepare. I think by the time I got told that I had the interview, it was maybe like a week or so later, and they asked me to prepare a 5 minute presentation on what I think the role of an assistant psychologist is. Um, which I found really hard because I hadn't done it before. So it's just a lot of Googling and asking people. And I think they said in my feedback, the reason I got the role is because I was quite creative with it and I did something different to everyone else. So I think I maybe created an acronym out of like psychology or something and had a different point for each letter and did a bit of a presentation with that. And they quite liked that. And I guess because the role was quite a creative role and that it was helping to develop a training program, they thought I was suitable for the role. Um, I didn't interview for the adoption one. It was just kind of attached to that post. So I applied for them both together. And the person who was managing or supervising the inpatient part of the job did the interview for the whole thing. Um, so yeah, that's all I remember from it really. But it was about 3 or 4 years ago now.
You know,
Um,
you said that you talked to other people. Where did you get your advice from? Who did you have that you could talk to?
Um, to be honest, I think it was more just looking online because I didn't know a lot of, I don't think I knew any assistant psychologists at that time. Um, I think I probably just spoke to people who I'd done my undergraduate with and kind of asked what they might do. Um, and just sort of had to wing it a little bit. Um, but I guess the role of an assistant psychologist is kind of doing the role of a qualified psychologist, but under supervision and to a lower level. So I kind of looked on forums and stuff and just tried to gather as much information as I could, but it was quite difficult. Um, yeah, and I think the interview process can be quite tough because if people just aren't very confident in interviews, it might stop you from getting jobs. So I'd say just practice as much as you can. And I found that the more interviews I did, the better I got at them. Um, but yeah, the first one was quite nerve-wracking.
And Ellie's asked here, what on your application for the roles do you think helped get them?
Um, I think during so I've put at the bottom of this slide other experience I thought helped. Um, so I did some support work whilst I was doing my undergrad, but it was more sort of I picked it up when I was at home for Christmas or the summer, that sort of thing. And I also did some volunteering at uni, including with the Stroke Association and with the National Autistic Society. So I tried to include some of what I'd done in the application. And the way I applied for the assistant roles is they're sort of all advertised on the NHS jobs website. So I would look at them every day, and if I saw one, I would apply for it. But the problem was because so many people were applying, sometimes the advert would be taken down before you even finished your application. So it's quite brutal. So I kind of had a template of what I wanted to say, and then I would copy and paste it into each application, but maybe change it to, I guess, suit the role more that I was applying for. So with this one, I tried to focus on things that I'd done with children more. And whereas when I went on to do other roles, I would focus more on, say, like the Stroke Association really helped with getting the role in the community stroke team. So just kind of gearing your experience towards the role a little bit. And if you don't have direct experience in that role, maybe just owning that, but saying, that you're passionate and willing to learn, and maybe, I guess, show examples of skills that can be applied to different situations.
That's
Um,
really helpful. Yeah.
yeah, I would recommend just having like a template of what you've done and then yeah, have little bits that you can take out and swap in because it saves a lot of time.
So one of the exercises that Mia and I are cooking up at the minute that we'll be working with Steph on as well is thinking about an exercise specifically to be looking at AP jobs and thinking about what experience people have currently got and then how they need to extend that to
Yeah.
be something that they can articulate it, to be something that an employer can see the generalizability without them having to work it out themselves.
Yeah, I think that would be really good because it is hard, and I do think you feel a bit on your own, and it's hard to talk to your peers sometimes because you're probably all applying for like the same sorts of roles, then you're kind of in competition with each other, so it is hard. So I think I would have appreciated more support at the time from like undergrad and other stuff. But I think just trying to get as much experience as you can now, um, all counts when you're applying. So even if it's not paid work, you might need paid work to get onto the course, but the other experience still counts. So just think about anything that you've done really.
Mm.
Um,
Sorry, we
even if it's
interrupted
like
you.
work. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, sorry, we interrupted you. You
Oh, it's
were.
all right. Were there any other questions for that or
No, I'll keep track.
okay. Um, so I did both of those roles for maybe a year and a half, and then I guess most assistant roles are seen as temporary and they're usually on temporary contracts. So they're usually 12 months or so because it's recognized that people tend to move on to get a range of experience to help them get onto the course. Um, so I did that for about a year and a half. And I think in the end, I was quite bored of it because, especially with the staff training one, we were doing the same program over and over again. So it just got quite repetitive. And during COVID, it was all online. And yeah, in the end, I just thought it's time for me to move on and get something else. So I applied, same process again on the NHS website looking for more jobs. And I found that because I'd already had an assistant role, it did help me to get more interviews for other ones. So I think it's getting your foot in the door is the most important thing, and then you tend to be okay. Um, so my third role was in a community stroke and neuro rehab team. Um, so for this one, I had an in-person interview, even though it was during COVID. And it was again really hard. I don't remember the exact questions, but it was a lot about, you're in this situation and this thing happens. How would you respond to that? Or different like clinical scenarios or risk situations. And I didn't think I got the job because my first two roles weren't that clinical. So I didn't feel like I had the experience to answer all the questions. But I would recommend what I did was just trying to learn as much as I could about that service. So I Googled it, I went on the website, um, I looked on NHS website about what community stroke teams do and what neuro rehab is and all of that stuff. So I guess if you get an interview, just making sure you know a lot about the service and even like the NHS trust that it's in, what are the values of that trust and how do you show them in your work? I think they like that in interviews quite a lot. Um, so I got that role, which was again 2.5 days a week. But I didn't have anything for the other 2.5. So I had to keep applying. And then luckily I found one which was in an adult community mental health team. And I don't really remember the interview for that. I think it was online. And I think having the experience, because I'd already started in the stroke team, having that clinical experience really helped me to answer the questions for the other one. Um, so it is really hard because I think it is a case of the more experience you get, just the better you get at the interviews, the better you get at the job, and the more confident you feel to apply for stuff and get it. Um, yeah, I don't know if there were any questions about those two specific roles that I had. So community mental health team, I was doing a lot of individual therapy work with adults who had quite significant mental health difficulties. And I was doing groups as well. So we did like a Hearing Voices group and a compassion focused therapy group. So that was very clinical. And then in the stroke team was again a lot of individual work, mainly with people who had had strokes or who had other neurological conditions like Parkinson's or MS, or brain injuries or brain tumors. And we would do neuropsych assessments with them where we would test things like memory and concentration and attention and all of that. And we would also do therapy with them on an individual basis. to work on goals that they wanted to achieve to support their rehab. Um, they were both really interesting roles. The stroke one in particular, if you're interested in neuropsychology, was really enjoyable. There any questions about them too? Um,
Is it harder to find full-time roles? Because I've seen some courses that have full-time as a requirement.
Um, I don't think it is, no. I think it just happened that that's how it went for me. Because my first role, so the inpatient and the adoption, was advertised as one full-time post. It was just split between two different services, but it was one role. And then the only reason that my other two were kind of split was because they had split contracts, but I finished one of the first ones before the other one. So it just was with my working pattern that I needed ones. I actually found it was harder to find the part-time ones than the full-time ones. So hopefully there'll be full-time ones out there. And now that I'm a trainee, when I meet assistants in the different services, most of them do tend to be on full-time contracts, but they might only be for 12 months. So there's always the case of having to find something and move on every year, which is quite stressful.
It's really interesting. Where I'm working, we've got somebody working on the older adult dementia wards for 2.5 days, and in an eating disorder service for adolescents for 2.5 days. And actually, when you think about the groups that you're going to work with as a trainee, that's actually really good experience, isn't it?
Yeah,
To have
definitely.
those splits and have that opportunity to start to get in your head around what kind of client group you want to work with in the end, and what the what and what the the writing like a stick of rock goes through every client group, like attachment or something like that, where you just see it wherever you actually are.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think it's been quite hectic having the split roles the whole time, and you don't really know if you're coming or going half the time. But I think it really helped me to get on because I got, I guess, a wider range of experience in a shorter amount of time. Um,
And I'm just going to go back to a question before from Samira asking how long would you recommend being an assistant psychologist? And I suppose part of that question is, A, do you think there's an ideal time that the course wants you to? B, did you feel ready before you got on? Were you applying before you got on? I might be asking you things you're about to tell me in this another slide.
um, I think I think it depends on the role itself. So if, for example, the first two I did, I kind of maybe got a bit bored of or felt more ready to move on faster than the second two. And that's because I think the second two were so clinical and I had my own clients and I was doing therapy. I felt like I was continuously learning new stuff the whole time. So the only reason I left them last two was because I got onto the course, but I probably would have carried on with them a little bit longer. I would say between 1 and 2 years is a good amount of time to be an assistant in one service, depending on how interested you are in it and how much experience. I think with the first two I was in, by the end of it, I kind of thought I wasn't going to learn anything on top of what I've already learned. So I thought that's when it's time to move on. Um, but you might find in one role that you're just learning stuff all the time that's new. And in that case, there's no need to move on before you feel ready. Um, but yeah, usually I'd say about a year to 2 years max, and then it's probably time to move on.
Yeah. Can I
Um,
ask Rachel as well? Because one of the things I come across a lot that I felt actually myself when I was applying for courses, many decades ago. And I know many of the students that I speak to feel this real urgency to get onto the doctorate really quite quickly. And so there's kind of a feeling of wanting the minimum time between undergraduate and doctorate. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about how you felt once you'd got your assistant post, whether you felt that that apprenticeship, if you like, was something that was helpful? Was it frustrating? Did it feel, do you know what I mean?
yeah. I definitely felt the sort of urgency to get on. I think I was quite impatient with it. And I do sort of say, I'll go on to the next slide. So I applied 3 times in total before I got on. But my first attempt, literally, I'd got my assistant role in the October, and I literally applied that year because I'd spoken to my supervisor and he said you're probably not going to get on, but there's no harm in doing it just to get used to the process so you know what the questions are. And I thought that was quite a good idea. And there are a couple of courses, or I know Lancaster in particular, there's no set amount of experience you have, and they don't look at your application when you're applying. So I thought, I guess there's a really slim chance that I could have got on. And it was just impatience, really. I wasn't ready to get on. Yeah, I didn't want to wait. And I think because I'd applied for that whole York thing and some of my friends had got onto that, I'd already started feeling behind. Um, so yeah, on my first attempt, I didn't have much experience. I'd only just started. So it was mainly my voluntary stuff. So I didn't get any interviews that year, which wasn't a surprise. Um, my second attempt, so that was a year later. Um, I think I was on the reserve list for an interview for maybe the Bangor course, but it didn't end up happening. And then it was my third attempt. I literally got offered all four interviews and I got offered three places out of three interviews, which I did. So I think it's clear from that 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 was the year that I was ready and that they must have thought I was ready as well. Um, so I don't know really comparing to other people whether that is a normal amount of time before you get on. I know people in my course now who got on, that was their first attempt and they got on. And I know people who applied like 7 or 8 times and still haven't got on. So it's really varied. Um, but I am glad I applied the first time, even though I didn't really have much hope because it did just get me used to the application. There's set questions on the form and they're the same every year. So I found that the first time I created myself a bit of a template, like the assistant applications, putting my experience in, and then you can kind of just update it and change it every year based on what you've done that's new. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
and I applied
just
to a
can
rate.
I? Yeah, sorry, Rach. I was just going to add to that that when you ask for a reference from somebody, that is also that it gets carried over from year to year. So if Rachel had asked me for a reference 3 years ago or something, she probably would just keep asking me for a reference unless she'd done any more academic work, and then she would need to keep updating me about what she'd done. So this is something about also something about valuing your supervisors and making sure that you work well with your supervisors. Like just be a really good student because this is the person that's going to potentially be your academic advisor for quite some time. So I really, like I know that people that I've given references for, you know your students quite well when you give references, and you'll put in the things that you, especially if you're a clinical background, you'll put in the stuff that you know is important for the doctorate. So make sure you treat your referees well. So I'd just say that. Sorry, Rich, I interrupted you again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because with my academic reference, it was my research supervisor from my undergrad who was also my tutor, I think, or I did some voluntary research experience with her. So I guess I knew her quite well, but I didn't really think about the doctorate at the time. So I didn't really stay in touch. And it was kind of quite awkward, really, because it was just every year I was like, oh, hi, it's me again. Can you do my reference? I didn't get on. Um, but luckily she was really nice and she, yeah, probably just copied and pasted the same thing every year, to be honest. But I know people who have had problems with references before or who haven't been able to get in contact with their academic reference, and it can get a bit messy. And I think references do count for quite a lot. So you'll have an academic reference and you'll also have a clinical reference from any work experience that you've got, and you choose who both of them are. And I'm not sure if this is a myth or not, but I think sometimes they're asked to rank you against other people that they give references for. So
Yeah,
I
that's not a
guess,
myth.
is it not?
No, it's not a myth. So you're asked how many students you've given references for. It's like I think it's less than two to five, whatever it is. So there's a number there, and then you're asked, to rank the student amongst all of those references that you've given. So um, so no, it's not a myth at all, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I guess that's not to put pressure on because if you're doing I'm sure you're all doing good jobs and like you'll have a good reference. I'm sure if I feel like everyone who wants to do the course is pretty good at what they do and everyone is worthy of getting on. But yeah, it might just help to keep in touch with referees and just yeah, keep them updated and yeah, that might help.
I've always found it helpful that the students that I have given references for have been really clear with me right from the beginning. This is really what they want to do, and they've told me a lot about what they're doing outside of their academic work to get their experience, so I know them by the time I'm writing the reference. Because if you're a stranger to them, then that's quite difficult to write a reference. So it's going to be a bit bland. It's going to be a bit beige, really, the reference. So you want to be thinking about making sure that your potential referees do know something about you. If you're getting good grades, tell them you're getting good grades. Talk about how this is going to help you in the future or whatever. Have that relationship with them. There's
Yeah.
some questions, Rachel.
Yeah.
So Steph has asked, how did the application go with Lancaster Uni, considering they don't require previous clinical experience? How does that even work? How do they choose people?
Yeah, so you still have to do the application. So with through the clearinghouse, when you apply, you can choose up to 4 universities to apply to. Um, with Lancaster, you have to do this test. And basically they choose who gets interviews based on how you do in the test. Um, yeah, it's a bit annoying because so the test that I did, I think they only do one of them now, but when I first applied to Lancaster, they did a verbal reasoning test and a deductive reasoning test. So the verbal one would be like a big passage of text, a bit like comprehension, and you would read through and answer questions quickly based on the information. And the deductive reasoning one, I don't know how to explain it really, but you'd be asked questions. It's not really mathematical, but it is a little bit. So you might be asked like, oh, this person, and this person work in the same office and they want to arrange a time to meet. This person has a meeting at this time, this person's on annual leave, and this person's blah 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 blah. Try and find a time for them to meet. And you would have to, I guess, use logic and the information in the text to provide an answer, but it's all timed. I've probably just scared a lot of people because it sounds really scary, but the more you practice it, you do get better at it. I think a lot of people are put off by doing it because they think, oh, I'm just not good at that sort of thing. And that was me because the first time I applied to Lancaster because I didn't need the application. But once you've done the test, I think you get your results from Lancaster, so you can see where you rank. And to get an interview, I think you have to be in the top third. And I remember looking and I was just scrolling trying to find my name and I was somewhere in the bottom quarter. So I thought, oh, I'm never doing that test ever again. I'm rubbish at it. But unfortunately, Manchester make you do the same test. So when at the year that I got on, I thought I'm going to try and do it again, and I practiced and practiced and practiced, and it must have worked because I got an interview and I got on. Um, but Manchester do also look at your application. It's not just based on the test. But yeah, that's it with Lancaster. So you do the test, which you can practice online, and you are given like a certain time frame to do it in like a week, and you do it like on your own computer. And then, yeah, if you go in the top half, you get an interview, and if you don't, then you don't, basically.
How did you practice for the test?
So I used a website called SHL, I think. I can't remember what it stands for. Um, but they had so when they did the verbal reasoning one, they had a lot of good practice ones on there. But now I don't think they do the verbal reasoning anymore. They just do the deductive reasoning. And when I was practicing the first time, I bought a package, which I know not everyone can do, but you can pay to practice basically, which I don't really agree with. But fortunately, I was able to do that. I think there was like 4 assistants in my service at the time, and we shared the cost of it so we could all practice on the same account basically. So it was a lot cheaper. Um, but now I think it's on. I'll have to remember the name of the website and send it to Louisa. But the sort of system that you do the actual test through, which is sent to you, you sent a link to do the test on. They do have a couple of practice ones on that website now, and you practice through there, and it's in the same format that it is for the actual test, so it's a lot better because it's quite an interactive test, so you have to like drag and drop boxes and click different things, and it's not a case of just typing in the answer. I can't remember for the life of me what it's called. So I'll find out and I'll send it to Louisa and she can send it out to you guys. But yeah, I just practiced on there basically and found that yeah, I did get a bit easier the more I did it.
I think I mean it's in a way it's takes some of the mystery out of things, that there's also a test, a standardized test, as well as your application form. I know when I was working on the Newcastle doctorate, I don't know if they still do this, but it's just to show you how courses vary, is that they used to do a statistical analysis task and a paper critique. So these were all pre-interview tasks. So, you know, I mean, it just sounds scary, but then, you know, lots of jobs are scary and the rewards are great, and jobs that have great rewards quite often are competitive and scary. So don't get put off by it, but it does sound like there's ways to maybe work your way around it. So there's another question, which again, you might be about to answer, but about what made you choose Manchester. Obviously, you knew I was here. Not really, that's a joke.
I moved to Manchester for my first assistant role and I've loved it ever since I lived here. So I just wanted to stay here basically. I really like it here. I did look at the course, sort of what they do on the course. So on the Clearinghouse website, you can look at each university and the course structure. So different courses specialise in different things. Manchester's got a bit of a rep for being very CBT heavy. And it is quite CBT heavy, but you do also do other things as well. And I had a bit of research experience as well, which I think Manchester quite like. So again, I thought that, yeah. Also, I don't know if this is really true or not, or if I should say it, but I've noticed that on my cohort, probably about 3/4 of us are from the Greater Manchester area or have worked here. So I thought it might help me if I'm from here and know people. Yeah. And that's what I would say for you. I think it would be probably a good idea to apply to Manchester because, yeah, a lot of people who are on the course have worked here and have done maybe the masters or their undergrad at Manchester. So, yeah, I just wanted to stay here basically. And yeah, it was the closest.
Good reason. And also, from Samira, have you got any example questions from the interviews that you can share?
So each course has a sort of slightly different interview process. And again, if you look online on the Clearinghouse, you might be able to find some information about that. With Manchester, I actually thought it was the best interview process, which is another reason why I applied, because I'd heard that the interview was only 20 minutes long. I thought that sounded great. And what they do in the interview is they ask you about different scenarios. So rather than talking about your own experience, they kind of don't care about that at that stage. They just want to know what you know about psychology and applying it and working in a therapeutic way. So I think you're given like one clinical scenario. For example, you're doing therapy with someone, and then they would ask you questions about the assessment process, formulation process, and intervention. And then they would also give you a research scenario and ask you questions about that as well. I can't remember the exact ones and probably wouldn't be allowed to say anyway, but yeah, the research one might ask you to design a study or talk about the strengths and limitations of certain research methods. The research bit sounds scary, but it wasn't that bad. I'd only done my undergrad sort of research stuff, so they don't expect any more knowledge on top of that basic undergrad stuff. Yeah, and then I think there was also a scenario about sort of equality and diversity, and about sort of different populations and how they can be more included and how clinical psychology could be more representative. I think that was a new addition to the interview process when I applied. So yeah, you kind of, if you know your stuff about, I guess, what a psychologist does, and if you have, the more experience you have doing it, the easier it is to answer the questions, I would say.
It actually, it makes a lot of sense, more sense hearing why you need to have this journey through the clinically relevant posts before the interview, when you hear what sorts of competitive questions you're going to have. Because
Yeah.
if you haven't got that experience, then you can't answer those questions.
No, definitely not. And I think, yeah, I don't think everyone is the same. So I also interviewed at Bangor and UCL, and they didn't really do scenarios as such, or they did, but they were maybe shorter and there were more questions. Um, so each uni is different. So I would just, yeah, look at the clearinghouse and see if it specifies what the interview process is, and if you would find that good or not, because yeah, some of them I know you have to do presentations or you have to critique papers, or a lot more effort goes into it, whereas Manchester was probably the most straightforward.
There's another couple of questions. So I can probably answer Ellie's one, which is the academic reference essential? Because I feel like I don't know anyone that would be able to give me an academic reference. It is essential, Ellie, but the academic reference you'll get from your third year tutor. So whoever's supervising your final year project will be the person you'll go to for your academic reference. And at the very least, they'll have access to, or you will send them your transcript, so they'll know exactly what it is that that you've got from your grades. But also, if I were you, I would be thinking about sending that person a précis, perhaps even your CV, but a summary of what it is that you want to do, and how you found your academic work, what your career plans are, whatever, just so they know a little bit more about you at that point. That's always what I would be asking people if I'm asked for an academic reference. I don't really know them. Maybe they haven't come to academic advising meetings. So always go to those if you can. So if you've got an academic advisor, you will have somebody who can give you an academic reference. But post third year, it's usually from your final year project. Okay, Steph, what are key tips you give for writing a doctoral application, and how did your approach change over the 3 attempts?
I think I put some tips on the last slide, so I'll go on to that. Some of them might be relevant to the application and some to sort of experience in general.
Perfect.
But to help for the application, try and gain a range of experiences. I think for the application itself, it's not about what you've done, it's about how you've reflected on that. And that's something that changed in my application over the years. So the first one, I think I probably didn't reflect much at all, and made sense that I got no interviews. But I learned to reflect more as time went on, and using things like supervision when you're an assistant, and asking supervisor for help is really good, or asking someone who knows the process to help you out. I think I put in the middle there, be reflective. Don't say what you did, say how what you have done has made you a better candidate for training. So rather than saying I've done all this great stuff, how has all that great stuff made you, why should you get chosen to be on the course? Basically, how has it made you better? How has it made you a better psychologist, a better reflective practitioner, a better, all of the stuff that you probably already know about. It's all about reflecting on it in the application. So I think they want people who can really think about how what they are doing is making a difference. Another tip I would have for the application, which I don't think I've written on there, is to think about what your values are. Because someone said this to me maybe the second time I applied, and I thought, I don't really know what my values are in relation to the profession. So I had to really sit down and think about it. But just sort of asking yourself, why do I want to do this job? And, what is important, to me about it. So I think like one of my values, for example, is using lived experience to enhance practice. So, in the first assistant role that I had in the training program, I did some work with an expert by experience who had lived experience of being in inpatient settings as a child, and we brought them in, and they co-led one of the days with us, and they did videos about their experiences. So, and from evaluating that staff program, we learned that that's the thing that the staff valued the most, was hearing from that lived experience. So I kind of took that as one of my values, to try and put that in all of the work that I do as much as possible, because it makes a difference. So just thinking about what is it that I think is important, and what do I want to change about the profession? What do I want to make better? What do I want to make sure that I do to live by my values and work by my values? There are probably things online like worksheets, or if I find anything, I'll send it to Louisa, like where you can think about what your values are and map them out a little bit. Yeah, anything else? Yeah, think about what makes you unique and emphasize it. You want to stand out a little bit, because otherwise the person reading your application is just going to be reading so many of them. You want to stand out a little bit. I think for me, I probably did maybe embellish a couple of things, nothing that wasn't true, but just that I thought might help me a little bit. Like, I applied to Bangor and I'm Welsh, so I sort of emphasised that, I have experience with the Welsh language, and I think that helped me to get an interview at Bangor, because they want people who can speak Welsh and speak the language. So, if you have knowledge of other languages, that's great, because you can reach many populations, and that makes you stand out and makes you really valuable in the profession. Similarly, if you know something like sign language, or I don't know, just anything that makes you stand out a little bit or gives you skills that other people might not have, I would try and throw that in there. I had a really good opportunity of writing for publication, which I think helped me to get on. So the person who I worked on in the training program, who did the lived experience stuff for us, they wanted to do a publication about their experiences. So we wrote that together and it got published. And I think that really helped me to get on. That was quite lucky for me. You can't really just walk into doing that sort of thing. So if you have any opportunities to do that, then do it, because I think people really like it. And it gives you an opportunity to understand about the research process and getting a paper published. It's really valuable experience for the course. Yeah, I'm not sure. Has anyone got any more questions?
See, I've got a couple of questions. One is, so when I was looking at the selection criteria for the University of Manchester, and this might help us all understand why we need this experience, but why do you think Manchester kind of gives extra points if you've had direct contact with a clinical psychologist doing assessment, formulation, intervention, or service evaluation? What is the thing? What's the ingredient that contact gives you that you need?
I think it just teaches you how to do the job, really. I think without that, you're probably not working in line with specific psychological models or theories. I think just having a supervisor who gives you that time and that effort to learn you and help you to develop your skills. Yeah, I just think it's helpful, because you're kind of learning how to do the role that they're doing, and that's what you're going to end up doing after you sort of graduate from the course. So I think it just gives you that more experience, so you're more confident going into the course, and also so that you practice ethically and in line with the sort of what they call like the guidelines that psychologists have to follow and the practices that we have to follow. Being in contact with a qualified clinical psychologist will make sure that you are practicing in the right way, and that you're developing the right skills that will apply to the course, where you can build on them even more.
When you were applying or thinking of applying, or you're in your assistant roles, did you what sort of things were you reading around before you got onto the doctorate? Like, were there specific journals that you read? Were there specific places you would go, or websites, or YouTube channels, or anything that you accessed that you found really helpful?
Um, I think I tried to stay on top of things like the news, so I knew what was going on currently and think about how psychology could like sort of relate to that. Um, I also would look at the BPS website quite a lot at the sort of guidelines for psychologists. Um, and I think on the BPS website there is a section about like news and what's going on in the profession. So I kind of kept up to date with that a little bit, just so I knew if there was anything new coming out, and sort of what was going on currently. Um, so I think in my personal life, I'm not very good at keeping up to date with things like the news and what's going on in the world. So I thought I need to do that for this because it's important. Um, yeah, I probably watched quite a few TED Talks on different things I thought might be helpful. Um, and I can't think what else, but if I do, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Samira has asked, how are you currently finding the research element of the clinical psychology doctorate?
It's good. I think it's not as scary as I thought it would be. Although every time I have supervision with Louisa, I probably say that I don't know what I'm doing. Um, I think it's a bit of trial and error. You kind of just do it, and yeah, I think it's just good to give everything a go because although I've got a bit of research experience, I've not got loads, and I think it's a bit of you're never quite sure of yourself if you're doing it right. Um, on the Manchester course, you do get 1 day a week, which is focused mainly on research. So on a Friday, you get a study day, which can be used for research. Although now they are putting some lectures on online on those days, so you don't always get that day. But I think it depends on where you are in the research process. Sometimes it feels really heavy and you've got loads to do, so you might be doing it a lot in your spare time. Like this weekend, I wanted to get something done, so I was working through the weekend. But probably other times you don't have to do much at all, so it kind of just goes like that a little bit. Um, yeah, I'm doing my ethics application at the moment, which is just quite boring and a lot of, I think, hoops that you have to jump through or things that you have to explain that you didn't think you would have to explain, and it's a bit annoying. But once that's done, I'm hopeful that we'll just be able to get started and then it will become more interesting again and we'll just be doing it. So yeah, it's kind of up and down with the research, I think, but I quite like research, so I'm glad that I get that opportunity to do it on the course.
Is it worth saying something, Rachel, about how you choose your project at Manchester? What sort of freedom you have, if any, about what the research question is, what sort of support you get, just to give, because it sounds a bit scary that you just get it, but
Yeah,
there's a framework around that as well.
yeah, I think so. So before I started, I didn't have a clue how it would work. And I thought I would have to come up with a whole topic and thing myself and approach people, which some people might like to do, but I didn't. So luckily for me, on the Manchester course, you get sent a sort of project booklet which has all the projects in that supervisors are offering for that year. And you get to look at them all and meet with the supervisors if you're interested in them and find out a bit more about them. And then you rank, I think, your top five. And usually everyone gets allocated one of their top five choices. And then with that comes your research team. So the supervisors who are doing the project and you as the lead researcher kind of meeting together to develop the research question more. And I guess if you have your own interests or spin that you want to put on the research, then once you've kind of been allocated it, you can try and weave some of that in or take the research in a certain direction. But the general topic of the research is usually set in advance and you just choose one that you're interested in.
Thank you. Have we got other questions? Rachel, I'm assuming that's your last slide.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. Are there any more questions before we thank Rachel for her time? And to be honest, I don't know how we would have fitted a recorded presentation.
No.
And I think this has been actually a lot more useful, to be honest. Any more questions? Okay, well, I mean, one of the things I think that I've taken from it, apart from remembering this hideous experience of applying for the course, and actually, Rachel, I was on the whole course, on the whole undergraduate course for my first year. And I left the university completely and moved up to Durham because I was so sure I wasn't going to get into that scheme where you went straight into it. I just thought I can't even bear the possibility of being disappointed here. So I moved completely. I changed tack for a while. But a couple of the things that I think I'm going to take forward for our clinical psychology club is to maybe do some special sessions on reflection and supervision so that everybody actually understands exactly what they are and they're prepared potentially to talk about those things when they then go into interviews later on and understand the value of them and think about how to reflect within a sort of interview context. So yeah, so that was really excellent. Thank you so much for that. I have been recording, so if you wished I hadn't, I'll obliterate it, but I forgot to ask you beforehand.
Yeah, that's fine. I can send
Okay.
slides as well.
Okay, thank you. That would be fab. Okay, so you're getting lots of thank yous on the chat. So we'll let you get off to your busy trainee life.
Should I just mention about the
Oh, sorry, yes.
focus group?
Yeah,
So
go
we'll be
ahead.
doing an informal focus group with international students who have engaged with the club and finding out what information people would like from the club and sort of any concerns they have about pursuing a career in clinical psychology as an international student. And then once we have this information, we can go and research this and then maybe have a session where we provide this information back to you. If you want to email Louisa, then I think we can arrange sort of that focus group. It could be online or in person.
So might get some delayed responses, Steph, as people access this recording rather than the live session. But
Sure.
thank you for that.
Sure.
That's brilliant. I'm just going to stop recording then.